Can we check one thing? When did Seamus Heaney die? Was it how many years ago? About 5 years ago?
I don't know.
He died in August because it was this time of the year, and the year that Seamus Heaney died was when I started writing poetry again. So I was going to mention that at the beginning, you see, as a kind of an introduction, like you could ask, so when did you develop this interest in writing poetry?
I'm already recording, Peadar.
You're already
So we've got it all, but nonetheless, not to worry. Okay, everyone, welcome to this edition of the Irish Megaphone. This is just completely unexpected. You may if you listened to one of my first interviews was my good friend Peadar Somers, who lives in France. So Peadar just happened to be here. Peadar writes poetry. And we were doing a recording session here. He was recording some of his poetry. So I just got the idea, because he was explaining the poems between takes. And I thought, well, this is quite interesting. So, So, Peadar, thanks for joining me. Now, I can't be too formal. Let's just get straight into it. So, Peadar, just tell me how you got into poetry writing.
I was in Ireland. One of the last times I was in Ireland was about 5 or 6 years ago, and it was unfortunately the year that Seamus Heaney died, and was down in West Cork listening to the radio, and it just a graw developed in me for the poetry of Seamus Heaney, and started reading some of his work, and then I said I'd try my hand at writing.
There's a bit of verse in you, is there?
A little bit of verse.
There's a little bit of
verse in every Irish person.
How long ago was that? That's not that.
It's about 5-6 years ago, I think.
Okay.
And so because Seamus Heaney and his poetry, he talks about the importance of memory, and where we're coming from, and the value system that we have, and where that is coming from. And so quite a number of the poems that I write would be going back in time to memories of being a teenager in the west of Ireland, and trying to capture a small element of that time, but also some of the values that were held to by people, especially in rural Ireland, going back now, we'd have to be honest, 30 years.
What do you like to write about? Or is there any one recurring theme? I know you said it's more rural, or would in fact rural be your recurring theme?
It probably would, in the sense of that it would be the source of inspiration for especially the poems that would have an Irish interest in them. And so, for example, if we look at the poem about the men from Ballyferriter in their Curragh, that obviously was the west of Ireland, and when I was there as a teenager, and I was just amazed by the courage of these people going out on the Atlantic, and
Do we have that here in front of us? Or right, it's that one, yeah. So that one's called Trust.
Yeah. And so then I started to play around with the idea, and a Curragh is made with a wicker frame. And just calf skin.
I didn't know that.
It's just covered in calf skin. So you're basically like a cork on the waves, and you know that the
so they must be quite light, so to carry.
Very light. They can, 2 men can carry. One well-constituted man could probably carry one, but anyway, it depends on the length of the cork. But definitely two men could carry a cork, no problem. But it was just the idea that going out on the Atlantic, because sometimes it's quite intimidating to be on the Atlantic, and yet these men went out. That was their livelihood, to go and fish in that ocean, and just the idea that they were there. But also, the thought came to my mind that behind the men there was always the women, and the wives. They were always looking out for when their men were coming back, and because of the faith of these people, simple faith, rural faith in ways, but those women would have prayed constantly for their husbands out on the sea, and when you look at these small boats and the big sea, you realise they needed prayer.
The angry sea. I remember from Peg. Do you remember Peg in school?
Peg
this
Sayers.
Irish book, and I do remember some stories in that where the menfolk would have actually drowned.
That's right. There was the Great Storm in, I don't know, was it 1857 or whatever? But in the 19th century, the end of it, maybe now that Peg, the end of the 19th century, there was a hurricane, and quite a number of boats were lost, unfortunately. So I mean, fishermen and their wives praying for them, they go together, and they were very conscious of their dependency on divine intervention, so to speak, for their safety.
Interesting.
So,
okay.
Trust is 4 men from Ballyferreter pulling oars in a curragh. Men attired in bawneen caps, bobbing on the bawneen caps. These are small fry from a small town, facing up to a bellicose Neptune, spraying the boat with his rage, yet ignorant of the power in the prayers of wives undergirding the wicker frame.
Okay, so the next one I have here in front of... We're just going now about what we're standing under the microphone. We have the poems printed out on paper. This one is called Reflections on Caves. What's that about?
Well, this was inspired by a book written by C.K. Chesterton, famous English writer. C.S. Lewis, who's also a famous English writer and a professor of English in Oxford, he's deceased now, but he said that this C.K. Chesterton's book on the Son of Man was the one that most inspired him. And Chesterton, in his book, he talks about the fact that the first men, we found these caves in France that where we have these cave paintings going back 20,000 years, and we would call them today primitive man. Okay,
I remember seeing one in Menorca. There's some caves there, and that was my first time experiencing that.
Yeah.
In fact, my only time. I haven't seen them anywhere else. So.
Yes, and but Chesterton was struck by the fact that in these caves, the primitive man they were artists. They were painting, and they had a sense of beauty. And so, however far back we go in the history of mankind, we see this love for beauty and this creative, artistic element.
I suppose it's kind of, if you think about it, really, it's what separates man from the animal kingdom.
Yes.
A desire to create beautiful things like beautiful buildings or bridges.
Yes.
Music, poetry, in your case, for example, and in this case, paintings and caves.
Yes, and the first men were artists. We think of them as hunter-gatherers, completely ignorant, and so on like that. They weren't. They were okay. They weren't as technologically developed as us, but they had an understanding of what was beautiful, and they sought to replicate that in their paintings, and that led to them also a form of prayer. So prayer was also their incantations and their there was something in the heart of man at that time, and for me the element their understanding of beauty was something that struck me, and that was
What's that verse in the Bible talks about that God has placed
eternity
in the heart
in
of
their
man?
hearts of man? Yeah, it's in Ecclesiastes. Yeah.
Reflections on Caves. Considering you crawling out of time and into the Ardèche grottos, an artist undefined in Paleolithic, making art for beauty's sake. You tamed night terrors in painting, likeness of demons feared, and dreams of hunting horses, making art for beauty's sake. Your portraits became icons, spawning prayer and veneration, like masterpieces in the Venetian school, making art for beauty's sake. You left us with an impression that art is the watermark of humane, yet without a love of beauty, will it ever pull us out of the cave?
So this one is called Prodigal.
Prodigal. Well, this is just a take on, if you want to read in the Bible, there's the story of the prodigal son. And so this is a kind of an interpretation of that, the story of the prodigal son, taken from the Gospel of St. Luke in chapter 15, if you want to read it. And so I just put him as a young person today wanting to go and sow his oats. And yet there's this element that in the gospel brings us to a point where we need to surrender at some stage. And so it's a very, very good passage of the Bible to read. But this question at the end, can one trust love when one that love betrayed, is very key. Mm-hmm. You know, so he has to stop before he answers that question or finds an answer, mm-hmm. and seeks an answer. And I would encourage everybody to also ask themselves that question and seek an answer to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Prodigal. Away from the cramping family, to run with wolves and sow his oats he ran. Wild as a youth, uncouth and swaggering, tripping on the relative values of his newfound friends. Succumbing to the short-term stupor, he's a Jaeger-bombed simpleton, ready to pitch into the pool of a wasted season, downing the sour mash, elixir slop of the pig out. Then down into the crawling space, rite of passage tomb he goes, where young dogs lie, perplexed, yet ears cocked, apprehending the need to heed love's song of wisdom, exegeting from flesh the meaning of surrender. Home from far away, with short tail rent between his legs he comes, sees a distant shadow on the road, and then he stops. Not daring take another step, he wonders, can one trust love when one that love betrayed?
Brotherly humiliation? Is that the one you wanted to look at?
Yes, I don't think there's anybody who has not got memories of their time at school. And in Ireland, 35 years ago, school education was run for the most part by the religious orders, and like quite a number of men anyway. I went to the Christian Brothers, and some of the Christian Brothers were nice, and you could see that they were gifted teachers, and others, unfortunately, were a little bit sometimes sadistic in their way of teaching and disciplining kids. And
I met a guy who used to, the old wooden dusters for the blackboard. Mm-hmm. He would just literally crack that duster, the wooden part of the back of your head.
Yeah, that's right. And so this poem was inspired by a real episode that I witnessed where a young boy was, 8-9 years of age, and the angry, that's all I can say, was that the dominant emotion in the Christian Brother was anger, and the fright that the child got was traumatizing. It's a poem that describes in a certain way the trauma of education in that context.
Sweet Afton, I remember that cigarette brand.
Yes, the Sweet Afton brands, the yellow. And yeah, that's right. They were probably the cheapest cigarettes.
Were they?
Well, one of them, Woodbines, was another one.
I was very good when I think once I tried a chance smoking behind a wall of a field nearby, but I think that's my only. I'm lucky. I never smoked. But,
well, we used to have a school break in the middle of the morning, and we'd all go down to the local sweet shop, and the guy at the sweet shop, he would sell individual cigarettes. So
what, to the school kids?
To the school
kids. What age were you then?
I was a little bit. There was secondary school kids.
Did you smoke when you were in school?
2 cigarettes a day or something, but only later, But yeah, for a few years, and then just stopped. But fortunately, I didn't get addicted. So yeah, but
okay,
yeah,
very good, very good.
Brotherly humiliation. Hegarty! What the feck do you think you're at? Tone, one no deaf ear could close off or dodge. Calloused hands now clasping the buds of the second-class boy. They pull him up into silvered bristle, setting off the cherub cheeks. Then higher to be FA Cup presented, while the Cenobite's pockmarked nostrils flare out as the hem of a dervish. Lambswool soutane flashes black as the board, mirroring dilated pupils. High on the yellow bile, finisher coating his sweet afton-shaded teeth. Am I right, or am I right, lad? A young man needs the fear of God if he's to grow in understanding. Will you ever learn? The teaching comes as a spewing mist, while Hegarty's answer looks to bead up, then trickles down and out the inside of his shorts.
So next up we have, this one is called A Cork Lad Visits Belfast 1985. Tell us about that.
I was invited up to Belfast in 1985. I was, and we still had the Troubles on. Very few people from the Republic went to Northern Ireland.
And to this day, I've never been to Northern Ireland.
You've never been to Northern Ireland?
Never, no.
And because of all the media coverage, we were afraid. It was a place that struck fear in our hearts. We didn't. That was the way. And but yet, when I was there, I must admit that my discovery was that people from Belfast probably have the best sense of humour of anyone in Ireland. And that was one side. And then another funny thing was because the gable ends of houses were painted with propaganda for different paramilitary groups. And very often they would have a rainbow in it. Mm-hmm. And today we associate the rainbow with the LGBT movement. But at the time, if you were in the LGBT movement in 1985 in Belfast, you would have probably had a hard time walking the streets without getting beaten up. So I just was, it made me smile.
But aren't Sinn Féin now, they're all in favour of the diversity and LGBT and all that?
That's right, yeah. But
what's changed?
What's changed, and dysfunctionality, it's not just in individuals, it's also in groups and political parties and paramilitary groups as well. We're all a bit hypocrite if we're totally honest.
Yes.
A Cork Lad Visits Belfast, 1985. The telly said we should fear you, like the great white in those wildlife docs, hugging the shadows in the home of Nix. It appears her deadly daughters came to roost the cranes of Harland and Wolfe and the gantries along the West Link Road. As Hitchcock presents, it only takes a bunch of creeps to tear tragedy from the curtained threat of busted kneecaps. I say, appearances deceive, and when I saw your maid of honour, your gaily rainbowed gables split my sides. Beret black humour won my trust, and deriding ourselves with laughter, we faffed aloud in the zealot's maze, knowing that when it comes to clans, even the gods are known to dysfunction.
Okay, let's go on to see what's next.
Oh, yes.
Okay, this one has a bit of a farming theme.
Oh, yeah.
Feeding the bullocks.
if any of your listeners are from, rural Ireland, and we had a small farm, and the job after school in the winter was to feed the bullocks, and it was something I hated, because if it was raining or not raining, we still had to do it. The evenings were dark, and I grew up in the Golden Vale, so muddy ground, and the cattle would be in the paddock not far from the barn, and so you're walking through this mud to bring the buckets of pellets of food and put them out in the troughs for the.
What actually would you feed a bullock?
Well, you'd feed
I'm sure I know nothing about farming,
right,
very little. So they don't eat grass, do they? Or
well, they do. They eat hay or silage, but you would supplement it with meal or meal pellets, and that's what we had to give a certain quantity of meal pellets, and we'd feed them in the troughs every evening. And getting to those troughs with those bags, it was an ordeal. It was a fight. You had to fight through the bullocks to get there, but also fight through the mud and the cold and the rain, and it was terrible. And that was just a memory that I just wanted to capture. But we were doing that from October to March, and so that was a memory.
I like the line here, unclipping the corset. It was like unclipping the corset on a James Bond girl.
Yes. Well, the pellet bags, the way they have this string on the top? And
I do, yeah.
There's a kind of a knack for undoing them, but sometimes you wouldn't have the knack. And if it's not, it gets very frustrating trying to undo those strings if you don't have it. So that's what I say.
You
James
have to have
Bond.
the skill.
Oh yeah, James Bond was fantastic for getting the corsets off,
Very good, very good.
Yeah.
Feeding the bullocks. Once October is out, the cattle are in the paddock, corralled off from latter rain-sogged land. And once again, the roster tags on teenage lads the chore. Feed the bevy of bullocks. In the back kitchen closet wait wellies and trenchy, coat that survived the ridge of Messine, to be tested again by December drenchings. Out in the mealhouse, undo the crocheted string, closing the top of the pellet bag. Like unclipping the corset on a James Bond girl, you've the knack or not, if not, the shaving cutter blade. Pour bags into buckets, then lug 'em to the galvanized troughs, trudging through the sucking, wedged clay netherworld. Heave buckets to the feeder lip, where lips embracing, plastic pails regurgitate, what will keep the livestock from death in the winter, before spring returns a buttercup sheen to the muddy scabs of their hair-knot hides.
This is my favourite one, I think.
Right.
The joy of racing blood.
Yeah. Well, again, if anybody has been to Doonbeg, you may know that every year there are donkey races. And
Do they still do that?
Good question. That's one, maybe one of your listeners could inform us and let us know if they are still doing the donkey races. But one year we were on holidays in Doonbeg and we got to attend the donkey races, and it was a huge occasion. There was bunting everywhere. There was lots of vendors for selling candy floss and all those things we associate with carnival atmosphere. And but it was a rural Irish carnival atmosphere.
They have rock patter.
Long
sticks of rock. Pink.
No, maybe not. You could, but you would definitely have the baked potatoes machine, that kind of stuff, or even a chipper and these cars and the generator of going outside and stuff like that. But that was a
no wind powered cars then.
No wind powered cars then. But it was the rural Irish equivalent of going to Cheltenham, And they got totally into the races and the shouting and the supporting and betting in all probability. So that was a memory. And
Would you have liked bookies and everything there? Yeah.
Oh, you would. Well, whether you'd have organised bookies, or whether it was, a group of people and they're sharing money and doing it like that. But yeah, it was.
Was it like one of these events you'd like dress up for, or what? Or
maybe the
or
locals.
would they be out in their Wellington boots and their caps?
All of these festivals, you see, at that time in rural Ireland, these festivals were opportunities for the young people to meet. And so if you were wanting to, meet a girl, rural farmers, farming was a full-time job. It still is a full-time job. And so how do you meet somebody if you want, you're looking for a potential spouse? And these events would have been, so you would have dressed up. You would have dressed up because you would be trying to sell yourself in a way, So yeah.
Okay, very good.
The joy of racing blood. The heart of a donkey of a man transcends understanding, until we see them together, rider and ridden, curly toes in curly flanks, coursing across the stone-walled fields of Doonbeg. They shimmy round the cowpats, the nettles and thistles, muzzles ragcloth bunged to cut off the come-ons of alluring sorrel and clover. Beatified, they become one with the thundering horde, taken up in a cloud of pretending they're at Cheltenham or Ascot, and the bunting are flags, and the caps are hats, and the grunting hollers are the delicate squeals of ladies who are only delighted to be here bearing witness to the triumph of man and beast.
Okay, so this one is called A Sea Pop. Now, this is a series of 3 poems, isn't it?
That's right, yeah.
So tell us about this. What's the idea behind the series?
Okay, well, we all go through, our lives go through different phases. We were young, for those of us who are no longer young. We were young once, and then we become...
Speaking for yourself, then.
Yeah.
Go on.
And then we get into a phase in our lives where we're, very focused on our career and getting ahead and so on like that. And then the final phase is when we are, in a way looking back, so to speak, and because we're no longer able to compete with the younger ones and so on like that. So the C-Pup is more about, when we're, let's say, 18 or 19. Unfortunately, we still see it with my metaphor in in the 3 poems is the sea and sailing. And so I took that as the underlying metaphor. Young people still today, very often they feel that they're, invincible. When they're young, and
it's
life
the nature
is,
of youth, really, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
And when I think back to all the risks I took when I was young.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, I won't mention any, but
no. But even whether it's riding a bicycle, down hills and stuff like that, or a car, but there's no sense of fear. Fear comes through having the life scared out of you, so to speak. And if you don't have that, there's no fear. So everything is just, the emotions are very strong. And so I call it the joyous riot of emotions. And,
You mentioned earlier there about YOLO wind. I see you've used that phrase in this poem. What is that? What's a YOLO wind?
Well, YOLO is an acronym for You Only Live Once. Oh. So your philosophy is you only live once, so let's live it to the full. And so we go and we, sometimes we can go to excess. So that's the thing.
Okay.
A C-Pup. The sea to a young man is a doorstopper of a book, a volume of adventures that you cross in a laser, skimming o'er the spume of the moment. There is no fear, no apprehension, no compass fix. In fact, no reading of words unable to describe the joyous riot of emotions running before a YOLO wind. In transports of this kind, all one can do is stack one's heart off the side of understanding, for the thrills are now and move too fast to leave reflection on the water. And the second one in the series, it's
Ubermensch.
Ubermensch, yeah.
And
Untermensch. Are we the Untermensch?
no, well, it
Ireland.
depends on whether. Well, if we're comparing ourselves with him, but this is the guy who is career focused and.
Let's tell our audience what Ubermensch. Ubermensch. Uber is the German word for up or over, and Mensch
Yes.
is a person.
Yeah.
So Unter is under, Uber is over.
Yeah.
So Ubermensch would be like superior person, or
Yes, it's Hegel's Superman. And so the Superman can be a force for good or a force for bad. But if he stays selfish, if he stays just focused on himself, and that's unfortunately what happens a lot, he misses out on an awful lot of things in life. And but that's the idea here, is that when I'm, in my mid to late 20s, early 30s, I can be totally focused on myself and my career and getting the car that I want, getting the woman that I want, getting the things that I want. But it doesn't, it doesn't necessarily make me a very person with good social skills or able to contribute constructively to the society in which I find myself.
But where did you where does the title, when you say Ubermensch, what are you kind of just? Is it again the sense of invincibility? I know we
Yes,
touched on that in the first
it
one.
is, yeah. But Hegel talks about that in the sense of the Superman, and that who sees himself one way or another as superior to others. And so that's why I say he's manifest.
Is he racist?
Not necessarily. I think it's more just an egotist, and that. But he could be. I mean, in today's society, it depends on how we define ourselves. Do I define myself by the things that I have? So by the iPhone I have, by the car I have, by the job I have, by the status I have, by the house I have. If we define ourselves by these things, then we are into this mentality. The risk is getting into that mentality there, and but in the long term. It's not a good bet for me.
Ubermensch. His yacht is racing, forging through the water. Driven to not know where he's going, he doesn't care about what's impending. And it doesn't matter anyway, 'cause the zeitgeist in his sails smells essence of the 80s. He has no time to wait for shadows to lengthen or for water to become dark and still. Storming ahead, he becomes one with the storm, positively believing he incarnates a better order of being, ambition encompassed in an adamant heart. His manifest places status above steerage in the ranking of catalogue travellers. He has no reason to repent of how he is determined by impulses professing more than they perform, for his want of how to use a sextant leads him to make love by sentiments alone.
Okay.
And the third poem in the series,
The title is called "It's the Wisdom of Spencer Tracy." For those of you who don't know, Spencer Tracy was a famous Hollywood actor.
That's
in
right.
its heyday. So
that's right. And he
I
starred.
remember him in. Do you want to come back? The Old Man and the Sea.
Exactly, and that's the
I
inspiration.
remember
yeah.
watching that when I was a child.
That's right.
This guy, was it a marlin
Yes.
fish he catches, and he just
That's
holds
right.
on to the fish on
fish.
it's on this long cord, and it just seems to go on forever.
That's right,
amazing
yeah.
story.
That's right, and that's where I got the idea of the title, because I just see Spencer Tracy like that. It's Hemingway was the author, The Old Man and the Sea, and it's just. I said, in fact, I was also thinking of my father in the sense of that you reach a certain age and, you're fighting, because you're fighting for life, you're fighting to move ahead all the time. And then there's a point when you realize you can't fight the waves anymore. You can't fight the inevitability of what's coming in front of you, and you realize that you can't control everything anymore, and yet you have only experienced a minimum of what life is about, and so in the end you begin to look and see, okay, what about life after this life? And that's where this question of love, and because the Bible explains that God's driving emotion is love, love for us, and so if we can trust him, and I'm not saying that is easy, but his love is a very powerful force to give us hope for the future, both in this life and the next.
And this series of 3 poems, are these the same person or 3 different types of people? Or
There are 3 different. It's particularly the phase that we go through in our lives. Because a sea pup, I think in sailing schools the pups are like in the scouts. You have the who are before
I had
the
a few
scouts.
teachers in school. They used to call me a pup.
Yes, that's right.
Pup, you.
Yes. So the different age categories, and so they don't know everything, but they once they know a little, they're off and they're doing wild things. Whereas the guy who's very sure of himself, it's in that there's an age where we are very, very sure of ourselves, and we can do no wrong, and we can, if we are totally focused on ourselves, it can lead us into a wall sometimes in our lives. And the last one again is just where if we accept our own mortality, and when we
I like that line there, Peadar. The older you get, you lie the older you get, you lie lower in the water, taking on less than before.
Yep. So yes, you it's taking on. So you've the link with the water. Taking on less water, but here's you take on less projects, you take on less.
Is it like the path? We talked earlier on there, we were having a cup of tea and we talked about going into a world of silence. Is it kind of I've lost my train of thought now. I forgot what I was going to ask you, but is it kind of is it like taking the path of least resistance and as you get older? Or
it wasn't a question of the least resistance, it was just that there's too much, life is too big, and all the questions that we have, we're not going to be able to get the answers to them in our own life. Our life is too finite, and that's why I say you recognize an ocean fills the mind with vast ideas of beyond any scope worth rigging. We are unable to understand everything about everything all the time, and so there are so many things that escape us, and the older you get, you realize, okay, what is the essential? What are my essential values? What is important? And we come back to things like family. Nobody regrets being an Ubermensch when they come to the end of their lives. Nobody regrets that they didn't have more money or a bigger car or stuff like that. They regret very often that they didn't love people more, that they didn't spend time with people more, they didn't trust people more, and so like that's the kind of reflection there that
I used to have this habit before in my fridges. I used to collect postcards with interesting quotes on them, and I would stick them on my fridge, and I had one, and the quote was by Mark Twain, and it said, I had it in my fridge for a long time. It said, 20 years from now you'll be more disappointed by the things you didn't do rather than the things you actually did.
Yes, that's right. And that idea of again, love. I mean, what is life about? What is and learning to love, and learning to be loved is a fundamental. And so our value system will encourage us to go in one direction or another. But there's hope in that point. There's hope in that point.
Okay.
That's what I hope to communicate.
Okay, good.
The wisdom of Spencer Tracy. You set a guardrail round the deck to resist the compressing cold damp upon your spirits, no longer challenging the waves flowing over and off the back of your scuppered sloop. The older you get, you lie lower in the water. Taking on less than before, you recognize an ocean fills the mind with vast ideas of beyond any scope worth rigging. Would hold below the waterline, you scoop to delay what is fated, bucketing life back to life before throwing a final plummet into love and finding its measure fathomless.
Oh, this one, I wanted to do this one, Peadar, the Canterbury Tale. Go on, it'll only take a second.
Okay.
So, okay, great. Yeah, that was one I did want to record.
Okay.
Okay, so so this one is called Canterbury Tale. So you have a little quote at the top there. It says, "Time doesn't exist independently of my perception of it."
Yeah.
I.K.
Immanuel Kant. So Kant was a philosopher from. We're going back. He was in part of Germany, which we call Prussia. Germany didn't exist at the time when he wrote it, but Kant was a philosopher, and one of the things was time. He's understanding, and that's where the quote comes from. Time doesn't exist independently of my perception of it. But Immanuel Kant was known by the people in his village for being very punctual, and the people in his village would set their own timepieces by observing when Kant would leave his house every day to go for a walk. Mm-hmm. And Kant used this time on his walking to think about his philosophy and to, if you like, work through some of the questions he was seeking to answer. And that's the idea. I made a link with time and the metaphor of a clock. And today everything is with batteries and so on. But before we used to have to wind up clocks, and there was a spring inside, and that caused a stress, and that would unwind. And so that was the idea that Kant was stressed by dealing with these questions, and that the walk that he would take would be a way of releasing some of that stress and finding solutions to the questions that he was asking. Mm-hmm. But it was just funny that the villagers in the town where he was living used to use his punctuality mm-hmm. for it made time exist for them. Mm-hmm. and for him, who was he's a philosopher, and speaking of time, it gave life to him. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the issues that he became famous for.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And speaking of time, I think we have to finish up now because I know you have an appointment. But look, thank you for taking the time to. This is just an idea that came as we were recording the poems, and thanks for taking the time to, stay on and just explain some of them, because I think it's quite interesting to hear the story behind each one. So thank you for joining me, Peadar.
And thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Canterbury Tale. The clinks of his blucher's buckles mimic ratcheting cogs in grandfather's clock, where weights on chains are furtive ninjas, easing down the oaken trunk. Every day the man is wound and sets off walking once the stress is cocked. Soon coils of sapient seer unfurl, becoming logic lines unlocked. One key to lighten weights is smelt, one key enlightens thoughts, and thus clockwork thinking tracks the curlicue, pendulum from the house and back. His mind once dampened, on sapphire stone is pressed and cleaved, its fruit, tomorrow's tangled theses, essential oil of this day's seed. The postulation then should hold, whether tied to crankiness or free not to wind the clock at all. Kant's punctuality made time exist, and time gave life to him through its perception.